Well, thanks very much for having me. I was reminded as I came in that I've spoken before, and I was asked, have I got anything new to say? That is down to you to decide. I have learned two things, many things in fact, but two specific things from the Admiral. Amphibiosity, which is a great word, and then jointery, which is something that we are going to concentrate on, the fact that these are not joined up in any way. So those of you that know the work that I've done, my focus is terrain and its impact, and what I'm looking at here is the first principles. So looking from the terrain up rather than the campaign down. So I think we could argue, perhaps agree, that terrain represents the battlefield. It's the thing that we need to know most about. There will be plenty of arguments to say Hamilton did or did not know anything. I find it difficult to believe that Hamilton only had 3 documents in his hand. What it is, of course, is the idea of the setting for all military campaigns. We can look at every military campaign and we consider the terrain, everything from the 5 spaces that the Admiral has discussed today, and we're going to be looking at some of those spaces. What I'm going to do is to introduce you to a few geological terms. I have a strange connection between being a geologist and a military historian. The reality of it is we need to look into the details of the landscape so that we can understand what it was that hastened the end of the campaign. And I think we can say that the seismic forces that have created earthquakes in the Çanakkale area are forces that had a pivotal impact in 1915, and I'm going to draw those to your attention. So I don't have any aeroplanes on my map, but I do have a map that's taken from a satellite, so clearly something that's not going to be in play at the time. And we know this place, everybody in the room, this place which is bizarre in form. My mother-in-law, who I gave this talk to yesterday, said it looks a bit like a boot, and I think she is right. One of the things about this, if I can get this thing to work, yes, thank you. One of the things about this landscape, it is a landscape created by tectonic forces. There's fractures in the Earth's crust to do with plates and things such as that. We have a set of faults which create the offsets in this coastline. These offsets are going to be significant when the Admiral's forebears arrived in this part of the world. This was a major aspect. The yellow thing, the Anafartalar thrust fault, sounds very grand. It basically creates the upland areas that we know and hear about often whenever we're in the room with Australian historians. The reality of this landscape, it is technically created by this seismic forces. Oops. So we have a geological map just because why not? The point about the geological map is it shows you the distribution of terrain elements controlling the nature of the ground. And so we can see the difference between Cape Helles and also the Anzac Cove area. This is going to be really significant when it comes down to logistics and supply, and I will be referring back to that. We can also see there's distinct differences between the 3 areas, Helles, Anzac and Suvla. And I think we're all considered and considering the nature of that landscape of cliffs and other features. So I'm going to try and take you through on this journey from the beginning to the end, from the forcing of the Dardanelles through to the evacuation. I'm no military man. We are obviously in the company of military personnel. But the reality of this is looking at it from a terrain specialist, we can examine each one of these aspects. I hope my naval comments are interesting. So one of the things that we can refer back to are the documents of the time, and any military historian will of course take these with a large pinch of salt and look at the reality of what's being stated. I think I would rate Gallipoli Diary as one of my most favourite books on the campaign, rightly or wrongly, beautifully written. And I think what we're seeing here is Hamilton musing on the fact that the admirals would like to force this on their own. The reality of this, of course, we've already seen is just how that is down to military campaign and command. If we look at the seismic aspects of this, we can see the offsetting of the Dardanelles Straits. This is a tough nut to crack. The reality of the way in which this tectonic force has created these coastlines mean you have a line abreast of ships in formation that have to move through that strangely offset coastline, creating bottlenecks, creating targets for those ships. This is not an easy task. We can also consider the bathymetric profile. Obviously, this way may not have been available to the admirals of the day. But if you look at this, you can see again just how the central channel, if you go there, I was there in April, reminding me of the passage of ships down this great strait of water. And yet, the idea of getting to the narrows and getting through those narrows is just incredible. We see a flow of water which is distinct. We can see the opportunity for mines to float down, and we can see the inevitability of that. Less forcing the Dardanelles, more sending ships to the bottom. So this is often discussed, often considered. The reality of sending ships along this set of waterways is perhaps misguided. Now, I think the delay we've seen from the 18th of March to the 25th of April, again, as was eloquently explained, was all down to the fact of waking up to the lack of jointery and the idea that we had to send a force to capture that piece of land. And I think Hamilton's commenting on the nature of the ground as he goes there, as he sees it with his own eyes. I love this cartoon. This comes from a 1960s comic book, probably based on the 1960s books. And so there you have, interestingly, an army officer and a naval one, wherein, look, oh boy, this map of Gallipoli is only 100 years old. Well, surely, but then what other maps were available is the question I would ask. So obviously when Hamilton arrives at the coast, yes, he is critical of the featureless map. I think possibly Hamilton is protesting rather too much when he says he has 3 documents in his hand. I'm sorry, but that has to be nonsense. The reality of it is that the Navy and Army had carried out a series of considerations of the forcing and taking of the Dardanelles. And this one, a secret document in 1909, which shows Hellas and shows, highlighted in red, the location of the landing places. We can see here how tough this was as a set of steep cliffs. This has to be influential in beach choice. And the idea that this was not handed over to Hamilton really beggars belief. We do not have, unfortunately, the library ticket to show that Caldwell did take it out and thrust it under the face of Hamilton. But come on, really? So we do know that, of course, landing on these beaches, this amazing photograph, of course, later in the campaign shows just how steep those cliffs are, how narrow those beaches are. We know the difficulty that Hamilton had. One thing that tends to be forgotten, not necessarily by colleagues here in this room, is just how well prepared the Ottomans were. This is an Ottoman victory. Let's be honest about this. Not necessarily a failure of the Allies, but a victory of the Ottomans. And what we can see is the manner in which the Ottomans defended their landscape, their physical features. So here we can see, obviously, a map that was created after the landings by a naval expert. We can see just how at Cape Helles the landscape was really fortified. This is using every aspect of terrain intelligence, i.e. intelligence on the ground. making sure that the trenches follow the contour lines, ensuring that the narrow beaches are going to be constrained, ensuring, of course, that there are strong points to break up any attack. This is a tough nut to crack. Now, in April, at a conference in Chinakale, I was asked and challenged by an Australian historian who said to me, why did Hamilton break up his force and land on all these beaches? Well, it is self-evident why. That is all he had to play with if he wanted to carry out the role of capturing those forts and to get rid of those troublesome howitzers. So we know the Battle of the Beaches. As far as I'm concerned, this is where the campaign was lost straight away. The reality of this may not necessarily have anything to do with maps, may not have anything to do necessarily with planning, but may have an immense amount to do with Clausewitzian friction as men are landing and getting ashore, how the enemy is stopping them doing so, and how the terrain is creating for them a real challenge of getting onto that high ground. So as I always remind our Anzac colleagues, the 29th Division's landings were the main landings for this, and the actual aspect of that was to take that high ground and to get into the reverse. The Anzac rush, of course, brave, considered, of course, on a landscape of great difficulty, once again, to get behind, avoiding that danger zone at Gabatepe. So this map produced after the event is fascinating in its sense because you can see at Helles how you divide up your terrain into a series of spurs and valleys or gullies. These are picked out on the 1908 map. You just have to know what you're looking for. The reality of it is that this was the best place to land, or the most sensible place to land in many senses. Its closeness and proximity to the Ottoman defences, the capability of sweeping that with the naval gunfire that we've already heard about today from Admiral Bennett, and the challenges, of course, of rising up that slope until you take the fortified position of Achi Baba, or Alti Tepe, as it's now known. The challenge, of course, is that you have an open glacis, which is allowing for those men to go up that slope, but also the way you're divided up into spurs, and we'll see that a little bit later on. The Ottoman mastery of this campaign will become clear. So if we look at the beaches, something that I and probably many of you, if not all of you, have spent a lot of time considering, I'm going to look in absolute detail at these landings. I've done this before. The reality about V Beach, for example, if we look at this and consider this from a terrain perspective, you have an amphitheatral form created by the natural geology, which has a bowl. That bowl, of course, magnifies the attack of the Ottomans and, of course, minimizes the nature of the landing, such as the men landing on that open shore land into a beaten zone of Ottoman rifle fire. The question of machine guns in some ways is immaterial. The point here is that those Ottomans, as again my mother-in-law mentioned yesterday, these men were fighting for their homeland. How right she is. So here we have men at probably the maximum range of their Mausers, but nevertheless creating a beaten zone that held those experienced soldiers. If we look at the way in which this was, of course, combated, this is an aerial photograph from later on. We can see all the infrastructure of the landings, and so this, of course, is not what it was like. Whether or not there were machine guns is something that people can argue into the small hours of the morning, but the reality of this is that that amphitheatral and bowl-like form meant that those men landing into this were landing into an envelope of fire. And of course, it meant that it needed the intelligence, the approach of somebody like Doughty Wiley. I had the pleasure and honour of visiting his grave for the first time in April, something that's really significant, to lead these men and to go through the ford and go around the flanks in order to try and break through, as we can see on the 26th. If we turn now to W Beach again, we understand the nature of that, the firepower that was poured down into that even narrower beach. And I think if we think, did Gallipoli have an impact on the Second World War? Yes, it absolutely did. Otherwise, why would the men landing on the beaches of Normandy not consider the nature of what they're facing, the idea of bringing those Hobart's funnies? Unfortunately, the lesson was not learned at Omaha. And so what we see here is an Omaha kind of approach with a draw going off up into the hinterland, and once again, a bowl-shaped form with limestone cliffs that created, of course, the opportunity for the kill zone, the kill box, which would hold the Lancashire Fusiliers along with the barbed wire positions, and again, represent the fact that those small bits of sand dune there were really significant. So once again, the only way of getting around there is, of course, through the bravery of brave men, in this case, Lancashire Fusiliers and others. You can see here how the intention was that at X Beach there would be this link-up. But the reality is going around and flanking the Ottomans was the only way. But the Ottomans had done their job. They had held the British on the beaches, and they had therefore bought valuable time. If we go to Anzac, Anzac is a unique landscape. It is what you would call a badland landscape, a landscape that is arid or semi-arid, a landscape that is created by flash floods, very topical and worrying to see the extent of damage that a flash flood can create, as we see in a tragedy in Spain just now. These deep ravines and gullies are difficult to understand and would be difficult even in today's conditions. The argument that a map would not be able to display this, I just really again would say fine, but when you're on the ground, it's about making sure you have tactical dominance and obviously getting to the top of this. So you can see here from General Cox of the Light Horse Brigade is clearly saying this is a landscape of great confusion, of difficulty. You know, you are doing this in twilight, you are doing this with a loss of cohesion, you are doing this not joined up. So it is the bravery of those men should not be underestimated, but the difficulty of getting to the top is huge. So yeah, there's the famous map that lots of people have spent a lot of time worrying about. The reality is there were no other maps. Let's be perfectly honest. The maps that the Ottomans were working on, and absolutely top quality maps, were not available. These were the maps that were available. And so the idea, of course, of going up that ridge and taking Saribert is really significant, avoiding Gaba Tepe and the opportunity there for the Ottomans to take out those men crossing that narrow defile. Clearly, this is going to be a difficult task. Remember, it is the 29th Division that is intending to take the main role, and this is a hopeful opportunity. Yeah. So, what we have here is once this has stopped, once those men have got to their position and no further on, once they're in this narrow scoop of land, there is no way out from this. The battle is lost, and so in some senses could be the campaign. Those men were held in this position by the Ottomans and their capability here. So once we have the initiation of trench warfare, you recall, should we withdraw? Birdwood is asking. And so Hamilton is saying, dig, and you will be safe. Once you have dug, yes, you've created a stop, but that's a stop for both sides. So let's move on to trench warfare, something I've spent a lot of time considering since I was 8 years old, and having seen All Quiet on the Western Front, the obviously original and only best one, 1930. What we'll see here is the fact that trench warfare is something that we spend a lot of time considering. And you can see here Major Dr. Karl Muellermann in his history looking at this. Once that had been initiated, that meant inertia. So I've already mentioned the challenge of the Anzac area. We can see here the blue line, which is in effect the front line position. We can read and marvel at the extent of that campaign, of the ingenuity of those men, of the great loss of life and the difficulty of that. But as my sketch section is showing, it's a scoop in a piece of land, a mountainous piece of land, which means that you have to get up that gully, the green gully. You have to take all of your logistics up that gully. You have to fortify and defend from that. It is something which is of significant challenge. Now, I told you I'm fascinated by trench warfare. I actually am a lecturer in trench warfare at Goldsmiths, which of course gives me great pleasure every day. But the reality of this is a different kind of trench warfare than we see on the Western Front, but still operating in the same way. This, of course, Charles Bean's famous photograph showing this as Steele's Post, the steepness of those trenches, something you would not get in the Western Front, all down to the nature of the aridity. We can see the fire step, the step up to get to that. We can see the various different levels which are helping sustain this. This, of course, is where the Australians and New Zealanders have their posies to actually maintain this static war. So the static war is going to lead to all of the other aspects of vantage, using, of course, the periscopic rifles, periscopes at Helles and Anzac. This is all about observation without getting your head shot off. As I say to my students, the principle of trench warfare is that you hold your enemy, you stop them in their tracks, and you protect yourselves until the point when you have to go over those bags. So this is what these men are doing. What you have to do also is protect your men in a set of dugouts or in areas behind the lines. There was no real place behind the lines. Everything was potentially under fire, and I love this photograph. Guys with their washing out. Love it or hate it, the film Gallipoli, I love it for a variety of reasons, shows this and depicts this kind of life. Incredible. The whole landscape covered with this, but it means that the fatigue shown and having men being fatigued in the front line and then living out their days in this observed position is just showing how challenging this is and how the sun beat down on these men and how they took on the Gallipoli uniform of not much, let's put it that way. We talked about logistics, and unfortunately, I think the General's not here to be able to talk about logistics, so I'll mention a few bits of that. What we're seeing here is the challenge of Anzac Cove. Anzac Cove, whether they should have landed there or didn't land there. I take the view, the same as Robin Pryor, that they're roughly the right area. How could you do this and pinpoint accuracy? The reality is once you get ashore, you have to maintain that. You have to get everything up there. You have to get the wounded down. You have to get your food and resources up there. It's a challenging aspect. If we move then from the trench warfare and challenges of Anzac to the battles for Krithia, this picture never fails to enthrall me. The challenges here is the way, again, how that landscape was broken up into valleys and spurs. And this is a challenge that was going to be felt by the Allies as they moved across this landscape. Getting out of those trenches, remember, boots on the ground, out of the trenches, capability. You are observed entirely on that landscape. And of course, the use of Gully Ravine, and Steve Chambers is expert on that, of course, but Gully Ravine is there for you to travel along, but equally it is these other ravines all the way through are dividing up your forces, and of course that was something considered for the French and British. So what we know is, again, the same issue about getting the resources ashore. Everything is coming from somewhere else. There is nothing on the ground. So we can see the chaos here, organized chaos, no doubt, but here at Settle Bahir. And what we see then is the creation of trench warfare with all of its symptoms. You know, whether it be Fusilier Street, for example, or Boomerang, or Douglas Street, or whatever it might be, Essex Street. These are all the complexity of front line, rear lines, communication trenches. You can see the way that this is divided up. And we can also see how somebody has used this trench diagram as best they could with the actual using aerial photographs, not geo-rectified, but using the best they could, squared out in pencil for artillery shoots. Obviously not going to be entirely accurate, but the best that they could do. Hellas had the same situation in terms of the creation and use of dugouts. I know because I've seen Steve's photographs of him mooching around in those, but there are big spiders there though, Steve, just saying this. So the reality of this is, once again, these are providing useful bolt holes for the men. Cool, there we go. But I want to carry out or draw your attention to an analysis of the trench maps and trench diagrams from in the amazing folios in the National Archives, which show the creation and development of the Ottoman mastery of this landscape. This is from November 18th, 1915, but if you look at the successive maps before this, you will see how the Ottomans create the front line, the second line, and most importantly, the redoubt line, with the blue being those ravines and those forts, redoubts, keeps, whatever you want to call them, which are there to divide up any enemy attack. The chances of this being a breakout after the initial or the failure of the chance to take Krithia is minimal. This war, this battle, this campaign was lost. These men, the Ottomans, knew how to maintain and construct these fortifications. So let's not forget this. It's really significant. Trafficability, again, really important. We can see how that is developing, this famous picture in Gully Ravine. We can see, I love this, obviously it's got rocks in it, it's got guys breaking rocks up. This is good, this is a good picture. But we can see how, of course, it's all about logistics. So on the ground, engineers and, of course, the infantry under their control, we can see them breaking up these rocks in order to create hard standing and opportunity for roads. Now, I think there's lots of interest in mine warfare, and I've spent a lot of time talking about mine warfare. But let's be honest, once mine warfare is initiated, you have lost. Mines, particularly at Gallipoli, are there to fill the time and to take out a few redoubts or strong points. Unless they're used strategically, they're not going to do anything, okay? Unless we have the Battle of Messines, we're not going to have any achievement. The great thing, though, of course, is that it gave the men something to do. And the opportunity there is to undermine and be awkward towards the Ottomans. So we can see that here, of course, Quinn's Post. We've got this great map which shows the topography, if you like, the trenches, which are the open lines, and the tunnels at different depths. This is amazing in some senses, complex. We can see them in this location. And this is what Cyril Lawrence is saying. He's not that complimentary about the British, is Cyril Lawrence. But anyway, what we can see here in this is the nature of tunneling and why the ground conditions at Anzac and also at Helles were absolutely perfect for the creation of this. Different types of soils, the opportunity to dig quite deeply and to dig narrow chambers without actually having to put any timbers in. This is not Ypres. So if you look at the Sphinx, let's hope the Sphinx lasts for some time to come, but you can see next time you're there, look carefully from Walker's Ridge and you will see the gravelly looking stuff and the finer looking stuff. The finer looking stuff are the stuff you're digging through. The gravelly looking stuff, that's your roof. That's why this thing is holding up. Okay, so let's move on briefly. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time looking at the August offensives. Obviously, lots of faith placed in this. I would say to the Admiral, of course, that the Beetles were held back by Fisher, so the Beetles were definitely landing crafts and definitely amphibious. So Fisher, for all his bluster and complaining, he could have actually given this to the army at the time for the amphibious warfare. But that shows your lack of jointery. There we go. So the reality here is they were released. Did they do a good job? Yes, they did. But the planning at Suvla was pitiful. We know this. There is no getting around it. And the particular significance of this is not only the lack of strategic forethought, the kind of things that have been discussed eloquently by the Admiral. The challenge here, of course, is to get to the high ground. Everybody knows this. If you are a battlefield gamer, as most of my students are, they know take the high ground. So why didn't Stopford? But we have to avoid looking for scapegoats. We have to start looking at the landscape, and we have to consider what is happening on that. You can see the red area, which is the Anzac perimeter. We know about the absolute hell on earth that was Lone Pine. I mean, it's just mind-blowing to see and understand what happened there in August. We understand why it is that you have to break out of that perimeter, because the Ottomans were holding that. When the Ottomans, of course, had their own frontal assaults, they failed. When a lot of the assaults that were taken in raids, they failed. The reality is you have to avoid that, but you're getting into unknown territory and you are finding it incredibly difficult to get round and up this slope. The reason for this, by the way, is that the reason it's so steep is because there is a fracture in the Earth's crust, which is creating this great scarp that is being eroded away. So what we're expecting, of course, at Suvla is the rapid deployment of troops ashore, a variety of beaches, but the drive was absent, and the significance of taking that surrounding range of hills was lost. So the August landings may have had this, but again, the same problem was enacted, the inertia. There's no doubting the bravery of the men on the ground. As you've heard, I've written a book or edited a book called Rough Riders, which looks again at the challenges of the yeomanry getting across this. But all you're doing here is creating an even bigger part of the perimeter, which you have to hold. Once again, still held the high ground by the Ottomans. The failure is resolute. So this is inertia. This is a lack of strategic forethought, and the opportunity to supply water to these men meant that they were in desperate straits. So water, this is a water war in some ways. The Ottomans controlled the water. Okay, so this is any westerns where you'll see the water hole is really significant. The Ottomans controlled that. So you can see the opportunity there at Helles once those are captured, the black dots. We can see the flow of water, such as it is down towards the Dardanelles Strait, so into the Ottoman sector. And you can see also that there are wells and other locations in Suvla Bay if you know where to look for them. But the one major gap in this is Anzac. There is no water unless it's at depth. So clearly, the Ottoman advantage is there. You can dig wells like Joe Murray's, which is saline, I'm afraid, now. The reality of it is is that the supply issue that the Dardanelles Commission is pointing out is massive. If you're going to continue a campaign, this needs to be resolved. You cannot simply bring a load of tins and have a load of Tommies filling those tins and carrying them up. Now, there were some technological solutions, like the use of these systems with an incredible amount of pipes pumping this up from condensers. So there is an opportunity there, but once again, this is not going to sustain the men on the ground. So the evacuation, I'm not really going to spend a huge amount of time on. I just wanted to point out that by the time we're getting into the winter, the chances of success are minimal, especially as that arid, dramatic landscape turns into a snow-covered, flash-flooding landscape that created the spurs, the valleys, and other things. And as Brigadier Chris Roberts in his book, The Landing at Anzac, pointed out, all you've done by landing the soldiers at Suvla Bay is create yet another self-sustaining POW camp, rather like what you have in Salonika at a certain point. So, my astounding comments at the end of this are, failure to take the high ground doomed the campaign. Yes, and it's all about inertia, but it's also about friction. Maybe there was no opportunity. There's no question that it is terrain alongside the Ottoman defense, the intelligent defensive containment by the Ottomans, the opportunity to fall back, the opportunity to maintain the high ground and to doom the Allies meant that this campaign was over early on in that. And that is down to the Ottomans, down to the landscape, and of course, all the other things that Avril Bennett has already mentioned. So, thanks very much.